I never thought I'd become one of those mothers-in-law who couldn't trust her son's wife. For the first year of their marriage, I kept my distance, gave them space, reminded myself that Daniel had chosen Amanda, and that was enough for me. She seemed sweet, always smiling, always asking how I was doing, always bringing me little gifts when they visited. My husband George would say I was overthinking things, that I should be grateful our son had found someone who cared about family, and I tried to be grateful. I really did. But there was something about the way Amanda looked at me sometimes, when she thought I wasn't paying attention. A calculation in her eyes that disappeared the moment I turned my head. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was becoming paranoid in my old age. I was 63 then, George was 67, and we'd been married for 41 years. We knew people. We knew when something felt off. But Daniel was so happy, and Amanda was so attentive, and I wanted to believe that my instincts were wrong. Everything changed 6 months ago when Amanda called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the day exactly because I'd just come back from my book club, and George was in the garage working on his woodworking projects like he did every Tuesday. The phone rang, and when I answered, Amanda's voice was trembling. "Mom," she said, and I still remember how strange it felt to hear her call me that, how she'd started doing it about 3 months into the marriage. "I need to talk to you about something important. Can I come over?" She arrived within 20 minutes, which told me she'd been close by when she called. She was wearing a pale blue dress that made her look younger than her 32 years, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying, and she clutched a tissue in her hand as she sat down on our living room couch. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, settling into the armchair across from her. George had come in from the garage, wiping sawdust from his hands, concern written across his weathered face. Amanda took a deep breath. "It's Daniel. He's been different lately. Distant. He works such long hours at the firm, and when he comes home, he barely talks to me. I think the stress is getting to him, and I'm worried about him." She looked up at us with those wide green eyes. "I'm worried about both of us." George sat down next to me, reaching for my hand. "Have you talked to him about it?" he asked gently. "I've tried," Amanda said, dabbing at her eyes. "But he just shuts down. Says everything is fine, that I'm overreacting. But I know my husband and something's wrong." She paused, and then she said the thing that would change everything. "I was thinking, maybe if I spent more time here with you both, it would help. You know Daniel better than anyone. Maybe you could help me understand what's going on with him." I felt George's hand tighten around mine. We exchanged a glance. It was a strange request, but Amanda seemed genuinely distressed, and if our son was struggling, we wanted to help. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked carefully. "Just, maybe I could come over more often? Stay for dinner a few times a week? I think being around family might help him remember what's important." She smiled through her tears. "And honestly, I could use the company too. It gets lonely in that apartment when he's working 16-hour days." It seemed reasonable enough. We agreed she could come over for dinner twice a week, and we'd try to have family dinners with Daniel when his schedule allowed. Amanda thanked us profusely, hugged us both, and left with a promise to see us that Friday. That was the beginning. The twice-weekly dinners became 3 times a week, then 4. Amanda started showing up in the afternoons, saying she'd been in the neighborhood and thought she'd stop by. She'd help me with cooking, sit with George while he worked on his projects, chat with us about her day. She was charming, attentive, always complimentary. She'd tell me how much she loved my recipes, how she wished her own mother had been as warm as me, how lucky Daniel was to have parents like us. "You're such an amazing cook, Mom," she'd say, watching me chop vegetables. "I hope I can be half as good as you someday. Daniel always talks about how his childhood was perfect because of you and George." I should have been pleased. Instead, I felt increasingly uneasy. There was something performative about her praise, something that felt rehearsed. But I couldn't put my finger on what exactly bothered me. And George seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. Then, about 2 months after that first conversation, Amanda showed up with 2 suitcases. It was a Thursday evening around 7. George and I had just finished dinner when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Amanda standing there, makeup smudged, those suitcases at her feet, looking absolutely devastated. "Amanda? What happened?" I stepped aside to let her in, my heart racing. She collapsed onto our couch sobbing. George rushed in from the kitchen, and we both stood there, watching this woman fall apart in our living room. When she finally caught her breath, she told us that she and Daniel had a massive fight. He'd accused her of being too needy, too dependent, said he needed space. She claimed he'd told her to leave, to go stay somewhere else for a while. He said he can't breathe, Amanda whispered, her voice breaking. He said I'm suffocating him. I don't understand what I did wrong. I just love him so much. George immediately pulled out his phone to call Daniel, but Amanda grabbed his arm. Please don't, she begged. He needs time to cool off. If you call him now, it'll just make things worse. Please, I'm asking you both. Can I just stay here for a few days? Just until he calms down. I looked at George. We were both thinking the same thing. I knew we were. This was our son's marriage, and we shouldn't get in the middle of it. But Amanda looked so broken, so vulnerable, and if Daniel had really kicked her out, we couldn't just send her to a hotel. Of course you can stay, George said, and I nodded in agreement, even though every instinct in my body was screaming that something about this wasn't right. That was 3 months ago. Amanda never left. The first week, she was the perfect house guest. She helped with everything, cooked meals, cleaned up after herself, gave us space. She'd retreat to the guest room early in the evening, apologizing for intruding on our privacy. Daniel came by twice that week, both times looking exhausted and confused. The first time, I pulled him aside in the kitchen. What's going on with you two? I asked quietly. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd done since he was a little boy when he was stressed. I honestly don't know, Mom. Things have been tense, yeah, but I never told her to leave. I came home from work one day, and she was gone. She left me a note saying she needed to give me the space I'd been asking for, but I never asked for space. Not like this. So you want her to come home? He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw something I'd never seen in my son's eyes before. Doubt. I don't know what I want anymore. Every conversation we have feels like a test I'm failing. I can't do anything right. Maybe some time apart is good for us. When Amanda came back downstairs, Daniel's whole demeanor changed. He became careful, measured, like he was walking on eggshells. They talked quietly in the living room while George and I pretended to watch television in the den. We couldn't hear the words, but we heard Amanda's voice rise and fall, heard what sounded like crying. When Daniel left that night, he looked more exhausted than when he'd arrived. The second week, small things started changing. Amanda began rearranging items in the kitchen, saying she was just trying to help, making things more efficient. She'd suggest different ways of doing things, always with a smile, always framed as helpful advice. Mom, I noticed you keep the spices alphabetically, but wouldn't it be easier to group them by type? Sweet spices together, savory together? It's what they taught us in the cooking class I took last year. I'd been organizing my spices the same way for 40 years, but I smiled and thanked her for the suggestion. Then I'd wait until she went upstairs and put everything back the way it was. But the next day, they'd be rearranged again. George started noticing things too. Amanda would join him in the garage, asking questions about his projects, and he enjoyed teaching her about woodworking at first. But then she started suggesting that he should wear better safety equipment, that his tools needed updating, that the garage was too cluttered and could be dangerous. She means well, George said to me one night as we got ready for bed, but there was doubt in his voice. She's just trying to be helpful. Is she though? I asked, and George didn't answer. By the third week, Amanda had established routines in our house. She'd wake up before us and make coffee, but not the way we liked it. When I politely mentioned that George preferred his coffee stronger, she looked hurt. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm just trying to do something nice for you both. You've been so generous letting me stay here. I want to contribute somehow. And then I'd feel guilty for correcting her, for not being grateful enough. That became a pattern. Every time I tried to maintain our normal routines, Amanda would make me feel like I was being ungrateful, like I was rejecting her efforts to help. She started doing our laundry, despite me asking her not to. She'd clean the house in ways that disrupted our systems. She'd plan dinners without asking what we wanted to eat. And always, she did it with a smile and an explanation about how she was just trying to be useful, just trying to earn her keep. The comments started subtly. Little observations that felt like criticisms wrapped in concern. Mom, have you thought about updating your wardrobe? Not that there's anything wrong with what you wear, but I saw this article about how women our age, well, your age, can look so much more modern with just a few key pieces. Or to George. Dad, I was reading about memory issues in older adults. Have you had your cognitive function checked recently? I've noticed you forget things sometimes. It's probably nothing, but it's better to be safe. George would laugh it off, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. We'd both started walking on eggshells in our own home. And we didn't know how to stop it without seeming like we were kicking out our struggling daughter-in-law. Daniel's visits became less frequent. When he did come by, Amanda would retreat to the guest room, saying she didn't want to make him uncomfortable, that she was giving him the space he needed. But I noticed she always left the door slightly open, positioned so she could hear our conversations. And later, she'd casually reference things that had been said, proving she'd been listening. One evening, about 6 weeks into her stay, Daniel came over for dinner. It was supposed to be just the four of us, a chance to talk things through. But the entire meal was tense. Amanda barely ate, pushing food around her plate, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Every time Daniel said something, she'd flinch slightly, like his words were physical blows, even though he was only talking about his work. After dinner, while Amanda was in the bathroom, Daniel pulled me aside again. Mom, I don't know what to do. I've tried talking to her, tried to work things out, but every conversation turns into me apologizing for things I don't think I did. She makes me feel crazy, like I'm remembering things wrong, like I'm the problem. Do you want her to move back home? I asked. I don't know if I want to be married anymore, Daniel said, and the admission seemed to shock him as much as it shocked me. Is that terrible? She hasn't done anything wrong. She's been nothing but loving and supportive, and yet I feel like I'm drowning. What kind of person does that make me? Before I could answer, Amanda appeared in the doorway. I don't know how long she'd been there, but something in her eyes told me she'd heard. Her expression shifted so quickly I almost missed it. A flash of something cold and calculating. Before her face crumpled into devastation. You want a divorce? Her voice was barely a whisper. Daniel looked stricken. Amanda, I didn't mean. No, it's fine. She held up her hand, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I'm not enough for you. I've tried so hard to be what you need, but it's never enough. She turned to me and George, her voice breaking. Thank you for letting me stay here. You've been more of a family to me than my own ever was. I'm sorry I'm such a burden. She ran upstairs, and we heard the guest room door close. Daniel started after her, but I caught his arm. Let her have some time, I said softly. This is a lot for all of us. Daniel left that night looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. George and I lay in bed, not speaking, both of us knowing that something was very wrong but neither of us knowing what to do about it. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Amanda sitting at the kitchen table, perfectly composed, makeup done, dressed in one of her nice outfits. She smiled at me like nothing had happened. Good morning, Mom. I made your favorite breakfast. French toast with fresh strawberries. I stared at her, searching for any sign of the devastation from the night before. There was nothing. Just that pleasant smile and those calculating eyes. Amanda, I said carefully, sitting down across from her. About last night. Let's not talk about it, she interrupted gently. Daniel was just stressed. He didn't mean what he said. I'm sure once he has some more time, he'll realize that our marriage is worth fighting for. And in the meantime, I'm so grateful to be here with you and Dad. You've made me feel so welcome. That's when I knew for certain. This wasn't about a struggling marriage or a woman who needed support from her husband's family. This was something else entirely. Something deliberate and planned. But I had no idea what Amanda's real agenda was, no idea what she was building toward. I just knew that I needed to find out, before whatever she was planning destroyed my son completely. If you love honest stories about family and the complicated truths we discover, stay with me and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, which city or state. I'd love to know who's out there, listening to this with me. The thing about Amanda was that she never made obvious mistakes. Everything she did was wrapped in kindness, in helpfulness, in concern. It made questioning her feel like I was the problem, like I was being paranoid or ungrateful. George and I would lie in bed at night, whispering about the small things that didn't add up. But in the morning light, with Amanda making breakfast and smiling, those concerns seemed petty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being played. So I started paying closer attention. It was the little things at first. The way Amanda would move my reading glasses from where I always left them, then find them for me with great concern about my memory. How she'd turn down the thermostat at night, then suggest to George that maybe we should have the heating system checked because the house felt cold. She was creating problems and then solving them, making herself indispensable, while simultaneously making us feel less capable. About 7 weeks into her stay, my sister Patricia came to visit. Patricia had always been sharp, the kind of woman who saw through people's nonsense. She lived 3 hours away in Richmond, and I hadn't told her much about the Amanda situation, just that our daughter-in-law was staying with us for a while. Patricia arrived on a Saturday afternoon, pulling into our driveway in her old Volvo, her gray hair cut short and practical. She'd barely walked through the door when Amanda appeared, all warmth and graciousness. "Aunt Patricia, I've heard so much about you." Amanda embraced my sister like they were old friends. "Mom talks about you all the time. I made cookies this morning. Your favorite," she told me. "Oatmeal raisin." Patricia stiffened in Amanda's arms, and I saw her eyes meet mine over Amanda's shoulder. My sister's expression was questioning, alert. She'd sensed something immediately. We sat in the living room, drinking tea and eating Amanda's cookies, which were admittedly delicious. Amanda dominated the conversation, asking Patricia about her life, her work as a retired school principal, her children. She was attentive and engaged, and to anyone else, she would have seemed perfect. But I watched Patricia's face, saw the way my sister's smile never quite reached her eyes. "So Amanda," Patricia said eventually, setting down her teacup with deliberate care. "How's the marriage counseling going?" That's usually the next step when couples separate temporarily. Amanda's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Oh, we haven't started that yet. Daniel's work schedule is so demanding, and I didn't want to pressure him. We're taking things slow, giving each other space to think." "Space?" Patricia's eyebrow rose. "But you're living with his parents. That seems more like proximity than space." "Patricia," I said quickly, seeing Amanda's eyes begin to water, recognizing the pattern. But my sister held up her hand. "I'm just asking questions, Claire. Reasonable questions." She turned back to Amanda. "Have you thought about going back to your own apartment? Working on yourself independently while you and Daniel sort things out?" "The lease is up next month," Amanda said softly, a tear rolling down her cheek. "And with everything that's happened, I can't face being alone right now. Mom and Dad have been so wonderful, making me feel like part of the family. I hope I'm not overstaying my welcome." She looked at me with those wide, wounded eyes, and I felt Patricia's sharp gaze on me too, waiting to see how I'd respond. I was trapped, as Amanda knew I would be. "Of course not, sweetheart," I heard myself say. "You're welcome here as long as you need." Patricia stayed for dinner, and I could feel her watching everything. The way Amanda anticipated George's needs before he voiced them. The way she'd gently correct me when I was telling a story, claiming I'd gotten a detail wrong. The way she managed to be the center of attention while appearing selfless and humble. After dinner, while Amanda was upstairs taking a shower, Patricia cornered me in the kitchen. "Claire, what the hell is going on here?" Her voice was low and urgent. "That woman is running your house. You're tiptoeing around her in your own home." "I know," I whispered back. "I know it looks bad, but Patricia, you don't understand how complicated it is. She hasn't done anything wrong, not really. She's just manipulating you." Patricia finished. "That's exactly what she's doing. The crying, the helplessness, the constant praise mixed with subtle criticism. It's classic manipulation. I saw it for 30 years in my work, Claire. Parents who controlled their kids this way. Kids who controlled their teachers this way. This is textbook." "But what's her endgame?" I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "What does she want?" Patricia was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I don't know yet. But it's something." And you need to figure it out before it's too late. She left that evening, but not before pulling George aside and having a similar conversation with him. After she'd gone, George and I sat in our bedroom, the door closed, talking in hushed voices like conspirators in our own home. Patricia's right, George said. This has gone on too long. We need to talk to Daniel, really talk to him. And we need to set some boundaries with Amanda. We decided we'd talk to Daniel first, without Amanda present. George called him the next morning and suggested they meet for lunch, just the two of them. Father and son time. Daniel agreed, sounding surprised but pleased. Amanda was in the living room when George got off the phone. I saw her watching him, and I knew she'd heard every word. Even though George had tried to be quiet. Her expression was neutral, pleasant, but I'd learned to read the tiny tells, the slight tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers curled into her palm before relaxing again. That's nice, she said brightly. You two should spend more time together. I'll make sure to have dinner ready when you get back, Dad. The way she called him Dad now so naturally, so possessively. Like she'd always been part of this family. Like she belonged here more than I did sometimes. George met Daniel at their favorite deli in town, the one they'd been going to since Daniel was in high school. When George came home 3 hours later, he looked shaken. We need to talk, he said to me. And we went out to the back porch where we could see if Amanda approached. She was in the kitchen, preparing dinner as promised, seemingly oblivious to our urgency. Daniel's a mess, Claire, George said, sitting heavily in his chair. He's seeing a therapist now, has been for a few weeks. He said the therapist helped him see that his marriage has been emotionally damaging, that Amanda uses guilt and manipulation to control him. But here's the thing. He can't figure out how to end it. Every time he tries to have a serious conversation with Amanda, she either cries or makes him feel like he's being cruel, or she brings up something he supposedly did wrong that he doesn't remember doing. That's called gaslighting, I said, remembering a term I'd read in an article Patricia had sent me last week. Yeah, that's what his therapist called it too. George rubbed his face with both hands. But Claire, there's more. Daniel said Amanda has been talking about how close she's gotten to us. How we're like her real parents now. She's told him multiple times that even if their marriage ends, she hopes she can still be part of our lives, still visit us regularly. A chill ran down my spine. She's trying to keep a connection to us even after the divorce. But why? I don't know. But Daniel's scared. He said she started talking about money, about how she'll need support if they split up, about how difficult it'll be for her to start over. He said she keeps reminding him of how generous we've been to her, how much we care about her welfare. We sat there in silence, watching the sun start to set through the trees in our backyard. This house, this life we'd built, it felt like it was being invaded, transformed into something unrecognizable. That night, Amanda made a beautiful dinner. Pot roast, George's favorite, with roasted vegetables and homemade rolls. She'd set the table with our good china, lit candles, made everything perfect. And all through dinner, she was cheerful and talkative, telling us about her day, asking about ours, acting like everything was wonderful. I've been thinking, she said as we were clearing the plates, her tone casual. I should probably start looking for a job again. I've been out of work since the separation, living off my savings, but that won't last forever. The thing is, I'm not sure what kind of work to look for. My marketing degree feels so outdated now. You worked in marketing? I asked, realizing I'd never actually known what Amanda did for a living. For a few years before I married Daniel. But I left that job when we decided to start trying for a family. Her voice went soft, sad. That was going to be this year. We were going to try for a baby. But I guess that's not happening now. She said it so wistfully, so full of lost hope. And I saw George's expression soften with sympathy. That's what she was good at. Finding the exact thing that would make you feel sorry for her. That would make you want to comfort her. You have plenty of time for children, I said carefully. You're only 32. I know. Amanda smiled, but there was something brittle in it. It's just hard, you know? I always imagined my life would look different by now. A husband who loved me, children, a real home. Instead, I'm living in my in-laws' guest room, trying to figure out how to rebuild my entire life. She excused herself and went upstairs, leaving George and me in the kitchen with the weight of her words. This was another pattern. She'd plant seeds of guilt or sympathy, then withdraw, letting those seeds take root and grow. The next few weeks were a study in careful observation. I started keeping a journal, documenting the small incidents that didn't add up. The way Amanda would mention casually that she'd seen a notice from our bank, then apologize for accidentally opening our mail. How she'd happened to run into our neighbor Martha, and learned all about the issues Martha was having with her daughter. How she'd answer our phone sometimes when we were in another room, taking messages but forgetting to tell us about them until days later. She was gathering information, inserting herself into our lives in ways that seemed helpful, but that I increasingly realized were strategic. She knew our schedules, our routines, our friends, our finances. She knew which of our friends we were closest to, which family members we talked to most often. She was mapping our lives like a general planning a campaign. I started calling Daniel more often, checking on him without Amanda knowing. He sounded increasingly desperate, torn between guilt over hurting Amanda and the clear knowledge that his marriage was toxic. She called me at work yesterday, he told me during one call. Said she'd been feeling dizzy and asked if I could take her to the doctor. When I said I was in the middle of something important, she said it was fine, that she didn't want to be a burden. But then she mentioned that you and Dad were out and she didn't want to drive herself if she was feeling faint. So I left work, picked her up, took her to urgent care. The doctor said there was nothing wrong with her. She was perfectly healthy. And on the drive home, she thanked me for proving that I still cared about her welfare. She manufactured an emergency to get your attention, I said. I know, Mom. I know that's what she did. But what if next time it's real and I don't come? What if something actually happens to her? That's what Amanda had done to my son. Made him doubt his own judgment, made him responsible for her well-being, tied him up in knots of guilt and obligation. 8 weeks into Amanda's stay with us, something shifted. She started making comments about the house, about how it was getting harder for George and me to maintain such a large property at our age. Have you two thought about downsizing? She asked one evening while we were watching television. This house is so big for just the two of you. Well, 3 of us now. But still, it's a lot of work. And these old houses need constant repairs. I heard George talking about the roof needing to be replaced soon. That's going to be expensive. We've lived here for 38 years, George said, his voice carrying a warning edge. We're not planning on moving. Oh, of course not, Amanda said quickly. I didn't mean now. I just meant, eventually. It's something to think about for the future. Planning ahead is always smart. But she'd planted the seed. Over the next week, she kept mentioning little things about the house. The stairs were steep. Weren't we worried about falling? The water heater was old. What if it broke? The neighborhood wasn't as safe as it used to be. Had we noticed more crime in the area? She was trying to make us feel unsafe, incapable, old. And I realized with growing horror that she was building towards something. This wasn't random. Every comment, every observation, every helpful suggestion was part of a larger plan. I just didn't know what that plan was yet. One night I couldn't sleep. It was around 2 a.m, and I got up to get some water. As I passed the guest room, I heard Amanda's voice. She was on the phone, speaking quietly but urgently. I stopped in the hallway, holding my breath, straining to hear. Not much longer now, Amanda was saying. I've laid the groundwork. They trust me completely. No, Daniel's almost broken. The house is the key, I told you that. Yes, I understand the timeline. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. She laughed then, soft and cold. And it was a sound I'd never heard from her before. Nothing like the warm, gentle laugh she used in front of us. This was calculating, triumphant. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she'd hear it. I crept back to my bedroom, eased the door closed, and shook George awake. She's planning something, I whispered urgently. Something to do with the house. George, I think we're in real danger here. George and I barely slept that night. We lay in the darkness of our bedroom, whispering urgently about what to do next. The problem was that I'd only heard part of Amanda's phone conversation. And without more context, we didn't know who she'd been talking to or what specifically she was planning. Going to Daniel with half-heard fragments of a late-night phone call would make us sound paranoid, possibly even delusional. Exactly what Amanda had been subtly suggesting we were becoming. "We need proof," George said finally, as the first light of dawn crept through our curtains. "Real, concrete proof of what she's doing. Otherwise, it's her word against ours, and she's spent 2 months making herself look like the perfect, devoted daughter-in-law." I agreed, but the question was how to get that proof without Amanda realizing we were onto her. She was observant, always watching, always aware. The next morning at breakfast, I studied her carefully while she made pancakes, chattering pleasantly about the beautiful weather, asking George about his plans for the day. She looked exactly like she always did, sweet, helpful content. If I hadn't heard that phone conversation, I never would have believed her capable of deception. "I'm meeting some of my old teaching friends for lunch today," I announced, watching Amanda's reaction. It was a lie, but I needed to see how she'd respond to me being out of the house. "That's wonderful, Mom." Amanda's smile was bright and genuine looking. "You should get out more, see your friends. You've been cooped up here taking care of me. I feel terrible about that." "You'll be all right here with just Dad?" I asked. "Of course. Dad and I get along great. Maybe I'll help him with his woodworking project. I've been wanting to learn how to use the lathe." Something about that made me uneasy, the image of Amanda in the garage with George and all those power tools, but I pushed the thought away. George was a grown man. He'd be fine for a few hours. I spent the afternoon at the library, using their computers to research. I looked up Amanda's background, her maiden name that I remembered from the wedding, Amanda Richter. I searched for her previous employment, her education, any digital footprint I could find. What I discovered was strange. There were gaps, inconsistencies. Her LinkedIn profile showed a marketing job that had ended 4 years ago, but nothing since then. No recent activity, no network connections, almost like she'd gone dormant. I found her Facebook page, but it had been scrubbed clean. The oldest post was from 3 years ago, right around when she would have met Daniel. Everything before that was gone. People don't usually delete their entire social media history unless they're hiding something. On a hunch, I searched for Amanda Richter combined with various legal terms: lawsuit, fraud, arrest. Nothing came up. Then I tried her name with real estate and property, thinking about her interest in our house. Still nothing directly, but I found something interesting. An obituary from 2 years ago in a small town in Pennsylvania. Helen Richter, age 73, survived by her daughter Amanda Richter. I read it carefully. Helen Richter had died after a brief illness. She'd been a widow, owned her home, had no other children. The obituary mentioned she'd been lovingly cared for in her final months by her devoted daughter. There was something about that phrasing, about the emphasis on Amanda's devotion, that made me uneasy. I searched for property records in that Pennsylvania town, and that's when I found it. Helen Richter's house had been sold 6 months after her death. The seller was listed as Amanda Richter, sole heir. The property had sold for nearly $400,000. So Amanda had inherited a house from her mother 2 years ago, and sold it for a substantial amount of money. That timeline was just a few months before she'd met Daniel. Where had that money gone? Why was she talking about living off savings and needing to find work? I printed out everything I'd found and tucked the papers into my purse. When I got home, George was in the living room looking troubled. Amanda was upstairs, allegedly taking a nap. "We need to talk," George said quietly, leading me out to the back porch. "Something happened today while you were gone." Amanda was helping me in the garage like she said, learning about the tools. Everything seemed fine, normal. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. I stepped outside to take the call, and when I came back, Amanda was at my workbench, going through the drawer where I keep important papers. "What kind of papers?" My stomach dropped. The deed to the house. Insurance documents. Our will. George's face was pale. When she saw me, she laughed it off, said she'd been looking for a pencil to mark some measurements and accidentally opened the wrong drawer. But Claire, she had the deed in her hands. She was reading it. I showed George what I'd found at the library. We sat there on the porch, piecing things together, and a picture was starting to emerge. A woman who'd inherited and sold her mother's house, who'd then married into another family, who was now carefully inserting herself into our lives while her marriage crumbled. A woman who was very interested in our house, our assets, our vulnerability. She's targeting us, George said, his voice hollow. Not Daniel. Us. The marriage to Daniel was just a way to get close to us. But why us specifically? I asked. We're comfortable, but we're not wealthy. The house is paid off, but it's not a mansion. What could she possibly want badly enough to go through all this? That question haunted me for the next several days. I watched Amanda more carefully than ever, noting every question she asked, every topic she steered conversations toward. She talked about estate planning, about the importance of having things in order at your age. She mentioned friends of hers whose elderly parents had been taken advantage of by unscrupulous caregivers. She brought up articles she'd read about elder abuse and financial exploitation, always with concerned expressions, always making it seem like she was looking out for our best interests. She was doing something I'd seen in a documentary once about con artists. She was inoculating us against the very crime she was committing. By constantly talking about exploitation and warning us to be careful, she was positioning herself as our protector, making it less likely we'd suspect her of being the actual threat. Daniel came over for dinner one evening at our request. We'd planned it carefully, making sure Amanda knew he was coming, hoping to observe how they interacted. Daniel looked better than he had in weeks, clearer-eyed, more confident. Amanda seemed to sense it too, because her behavior changed subtly. She was quieter, more withdrawn, playing the role of the wounded wife. "I've filed for divorce," Daniel announced halfway through the meal, his voice steady. "I wanted to tell you all in person. Amanda, I've had papers drawn up. It's no fault, and I'm offering a fair settlement. My lawyer will contact your lawyer to work out the details." Amanda's fork clattered to her plate. "You've hired a lawyer? Without even talking to me first about trying one more time to save our marriage?" "I've talked to you dozens of times," Daniel said, and I heard the exhaustion in his voice. "Every conversation ends the same way. I'm not doing this anymore, Amanda. It's over." "I see." Amanda's voice was cold now, the warmth completely gone. "And I suppose your parents support this decision?" "Our son's happiness is what we support," George said firmly. "If he says the marriage isn't working, we believe him." Amanda looked at each of us in turn, and for the first time, I saw her without any mask at all. Her eyes were calculating, angry, cold. Then, like a switch being flipped, her expression crumpled. "After everything I've done," she whispered. "After how much I've loved you all, treated you like my own parents, tried so hard to be part of this family, you're just going to discard me like I'm nothing. You'll always be welcome to visit," I heard myself say, even as George shot me a sharp look. But I needed to know what would happen when we didn't immediately cut her off. I needed to see what she'd do. Amanda's tears stopped as quickly as they'd started. She looked at me with something that might have been respect, or might have been triumph. "Thank you, Mom. That means the world to me. You and Dad have been so good to me. I hope I can continue to be part of your lives, even if Daniel and I can't work things out." Daniel left that night looking relieved but also worried. He pulled me aside before he went. "Be careful, Mom. My therapist thinks Amanda might escalate when she realizes she can't control me anymore. She might turn her attention more fully toward you and Dad." "What do you mean, escalate?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "I don't know exactly. But people like Amanda, they always have a backup plan. Always. Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't sign anything she gives you. Don't make any financial decisions without talking to me first. And for God's sake, don't leave her alone in the house." That last instruction proved impossible to follow. George and I had medical appointments, social obligations, our normal lives to maintain. We couldn't watch Amanda every second. And she seemed to know exactly when we'd let our guard down. 2 days after Daniel's announcement, I had a dentist appointment. George was going to be home, so I thought Amanda would be supervised. But when I got home 2 hours later, George's truck was gone and Amanda was in the kitchen, looking upset. "Where's George?" I asked immediately. He had to run to the hardware store. The kitchen faucet started leaking, and he wanted to fix it right away. He should be back any minute. Amanda was chopping vegetables for dinner, her movements precise and controlled. How was the dentist? Fine, I said shortly, heading toward our bedroom. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what. It was only later, when George got home and I asked him about the faucet, that the wrongness became clear. What faucet? George asked, confused. Nothing's wrong with the faucet. I went to the store to get more sandpaper. Amanda said you'd called and asked me to pick some up. I didn't call you, I said slowly. George, I was at the dentist. I didn't call anyone. We looked at each other, understanding dawning. Amanda had deliberately gotten George out of the house, using both our names to manipulate him into leaving. But why? What had she done in those 2 hours when she'd been alone here? I started searching. Nothing obvious was missing or moved. But when I went to my desk in the study, I found my address book had been moved slightly. When I opened it, I saw that several pages had creases, like someone had been carefully writing down the information. She'd copied our contacts, friends, family, doctors, lawyers. She'd given herself access to our entire network. But again, I couldn't understand why. What was her endgame? The answer came 3 days later, when I got a phone call from my best friend, Margaret. Claire, I got the strangest call today, Margaret said, her voice troubled. From Amanda. She was crying, saying she was worried about you and George. She said you'd both been forgetting things, that George had gotten lost driving to the grocery store last week, that you'd left the stove on twice. She wanted to know if I'd noticed any cognitive decline when I'd talked to you. My blood ran cold. Margaret, none of that is true. George hasn't gotten lost. I haven't left the stove on. She's lying. I figured as much, Margaret said. That's why I'm calling you. But Claire, she was very convincing. Very concerned and upset. If I didn't know you as well as I do, I might have believed her. How many people is she calling? That question sent me into a panic. Over the next several hours, I started getting more calls. My sister Patricia had heard from Amanda. Our neighbor, Martha, had received a concerned visit. Even our family doctor's office had gotten a call from Amanda, identifying herself as our daughter-in-law and expressing worry about our health, asking if we'd been showing signs of dementia, or if our medications needed to be adjusted. Amanda was systematically contacting everyone in our lives, planting seeds of doubt about our mental competency. She was building a narrative that George and I were declining, that we needed someone to look after us, that we were becoming vulnerable and in need of protection. She was setting up a guardianship scenario. That's what this was all leading to. If she could convince enough people, medical professionals, friends, family, maybe even a judge, that George and I weren't capable of taking care of ourselves anymore, she could petition for guardianship. And as our guardian, she'd have control over our assets, our house, our lives. I'd read about cases like this, predators who targeted elderly people, isolated them, convinced the world that they needed help, and then took over their lives legally. It was a long con, months or even years in the making. And Amanda had been planning this since before she even married Daniel. That night, George and I sat down with all the evidence we'd collected. We had documentation of the property sale after her mother's death, records of her calls to our friends and family, notes about all the small manipulations and lies. But was it enough? And more importantly, what did we do with it? We go to the police, George said. And tell them what? That our daughter-in-law has been too helpful? That she's made phone calls expressing concern about us? None of what she's done is technically illegal, George. She hasn't stolen anything, hasn't forged anything, hasn't physically harmed us. She's been smart about staying just on the right side of the law. Then what do? I thought about it carefully. We document everything. We get ahead of her narrative. We go to our doctor tomorrow and get complete cognitive assessments, proof that there's nothing wrong with us. We call everyone she's contacted and set the record straight. We talk to a lawyer about protecting our assets. And most importantly, we get her out of this house. How do we do that without causing a massive scene, or looking like we're the unstable ones? That was the question. Amanda had positioned herself so carefully that any aggressive move against her would make us look irrational or cruel. We had to be smarter than that. The next morning, I had an idea. It was risky, possibly even dangerous, but I was tired of being reactive. It was time to go on offense. I waited until Amanda was in the shower, then I went into the guest room she'd been occupying for 3 months. I'd never searched it thoroughly before. It had felt like a violation of privacy. But this was my house, and I needed to know what I was dealing with. In the closet, behind her neatly hung clothes, I found a locked box. It was small, fireproof, the kind people used for important documents. I didn't have a key, but I'd learned a few things over 63 years of life. I found a bobby pin in Amanda's bathroom, bent it carefully and worked at the lock. It took me 15 minutes of fumbling, my heart racing every time I heard a sound from elsewhere in the house. But finally, the lock clicked open. Inside, I found a notebook. And what I read in those pages changed everything I thought I knew about Amanda's plans. The notebook was organized like a business ledger, with dates, names, and amounts carefully recorded in Amanda's neat handwriting. But this wasn't a record of legitimate transactions, it was a catalog of cons. The first section detailed what she'd done to her own mother. Helen Richter hadn't died of a brief illness, as the obituary suggested. According to Amanda's notes, she'd moved in with her mother 2.5 years ago, claiming she needed a place to stay after a bad breakup. Over the next 8 months, Amanda had systematically isolated her mother from friends and other family members, convinced her that she was becoming forgetful and incompetent, and persuaded her to sign over power of attorney. Then, according to the clinical notes in the journal, Amanda had begun administering medication that wasn't prescribed. Nothing that would kill her mother outright, but enough to make her genuinely confused and weak. The doctors had attributed Helen's decline to rapid onset dementia and her body simply giving up. After her mother's death, Amanda had sold the house quickly, pocketed the money, and moved on to her next target. The journal had entries about 2 other elderly couples she'd befriended over the following months, learning their routines, their families, their assets. But neither con had gone all the way. She'd abandoned them for reasons she'd noted in shorthand. Son too involved, not worth the risk, and assets too complicated, legal issues. Then there were pages about Daniel. She'd researched him deliberately, targeted him at a charity event she knew he'd be attending. She'd noted everything about him: his work, his habits, his relationships. But more importantly, she'd written extensive notes about George and me. Our ages, our health, our property value, our estimated net worth. She'd written: parents isolated from extended family. 1 son, busy career, trusts wife. Property valuable, reverse mortgage potential. Medical expenses could create urgency. Timeline, 12 to 18 months. I felt sick reading it. This had never been about Daniel at all. He'd just been a way to get close to us, to gain our trust, to position herself as the concerned family member who could eventually take control of our lives. But the most chilling part was the last section of the notebook, dated just 2 weeks ago. It was labeled Exit Strategy, and detailed how she'd manage things once she'd achieved her goals. She was planning to have us declared incompetent, gain guardianship, sell our house, and move us into a nursing facility. She'd calculated that she could extract approximately $800,000 from the sale of our property and liquidation of our assets, minus what she'd need to spend on our care to maintain the appearance of being a devoted guardian. She'd even researched which facilities were the cheapest while still being respectable enough that no one would question her choices. And then, buried in the final pages, was something that made my hands shake. Notes about Daniel's life insurance policy. She'd written down the amount, the beneficiary, her as his wife, and the phrase accidental policy, double indemnity. There were more notes about Daniel's hiking hobby, the trails he frequented, the fact that he often went alone. She was planning to kill my son. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor of the guest room, holding that notebook, trying to process what I'd read. The shower had long since turned off, and I could hear Amanda moving around upstairs. I had to hide the notebook, had to get it somewhere safe before she realized I'd found it. I shoved it into the waistband of my pants, under my loose shirt, and hurried back to my bedroom. George was in the garage, but I couldn't risk calling him yet. Amanda had too good a hearing, always seemed to know when we were talking about her. Instead, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never thought I'd do. I took photographs of every page in that notebook, uploading them to a cloud storage account I created right there, one that Amanda wouldn't know about. Then I called Daniel. When he answered, I could barely keep my voice steady. Daniel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. And I need you not to react out loud in case Amanda can hear you. Are you somewhere private? I'm at work in my office. Mom, what's wrong? You sound. Daniel, I found evidence that Amanda has been planning to harm you. Physical harm. I need you to not go anywhere alone for the next few days. And I need you to vary your routine. Don't do anything predictable. Can you do that without explaining why? There was a long silence. Mom, are you sure? That's a serious accusation. I have proof. Written proof in her own handwriting. I also have proof that she's done this before, to other people. Her own mother died under suspicious circumstances, Daniel. And she's been planning to do something similar to us. Another silence, longer this time. I'm coming over. Right now. No, I said urgently. Not yet. We need to be smart about this. She can't know that we know. I need to figure out the right way to handle this. Someone we can take this to who will actually do something. Just promise me you'll be careful. Please. Daniel agreed, though I could hear the fear in his voice. After we hung up, I sat on my bed, trying to think clearly through the panic. The notebook was evidence, but of what exactly? Planning to commit fraud and manipulation wasn't the same as actually doing it. The notes about her mother were suspicious, but not proof of murder. And the notes about Daniel were vague enough that a lawyer could argue they were just random thoughts, not an actual plan. But it was enough to show a pattern, enough to make authorities take a second look at what Amanda had been doing. The question was who to go to first. The police? A lawyer? A social worker who dealt with elder abuse? I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly hid the notebook between my mattress and box spring. Amanda appeared in the doorway a moment later, freshly showered, smiling. Mom, are you feeling okay? You look pale. Just a headache, I said, forcing a smile. I think I'll lie down for a bit. Let me get you some aspirin, Amanda said, already turning toward the bathroom. And some water. You should stay hydrated. I wanted to scream at her to get away from me, to get out of my house, to stop pretending to care. But instead, I lay back on the bed and accepted the pills and water she brought. Though I palmed the aspirin and didn't swallow them. I'd read enough of her notebook to know that medication was one of her favorite tools. Over the next 2 days, George and I pretended everything was normal, while secretly preparing our countermove. We visited our family lawyer, Stuart Morrison, who'd handled our will and property transfers years ago. He was an older man, semi-retired, someone we'd known for decades. We showed him the photographs of Amanda's notebook, explained what had been happening. Stuart was quiet for a long time after we finished. This is beyond my expertise, he said finally. What you're describing is criminal, fraud, possibly attempted murder, elder abuse. You need to go to the police with this. But first, I'm going to refer you to a colleague who specializes in this kind of case. Her name is Jennifer Wu, and she's dealt with guardianship fraud before. She'll know how to present this evidence in a way that will get the authorities to act. We met with Jennifer Wu the next day, again making excuses to Amanda about why we were out. Jennifer was sharp, mid-40s, with intense dark eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the photographs, asked us detailed questions, and took careful notes. This is more common than you'd think, she said. There's a whole industry of people who target elderly individuals or couples, gain their trust, isolate them, and then take control of their assets through guardianship or power of attorney. What makes Amanda particularly dangerous is that she's patient, and she documents everything. Most of these predators are more impulsive. Can we have her arrested? George asked. Jennifer shook her head. Not yet. She hasn't actually committed a crime that we can prove. What she's done is ethically reprehensible and certainly indicates intent to commit fraud, but intent isn't enough for criminal charges in most cases. However, we can use this to get a restraining order, and we can definitely use it to ensure she never gains any legal authority over you. We can also report this to the police and ask them to open an investigation. What about the notes about Daniel? I asked. The life insurance, the hiking trails? That's more concerning from a criminal perspective, Jennifer admitted. That could be interpreted as planning a murder. We should definitely report that to the police immediately. And Daniel should file for a protective order as well. We left Jennifer's office with a plan. We'd go to the police that afternoon, file reports, turn over all our evidence. We'd get restraining orders against Amanda for all of us. And then we'd serve her with papers requiring her to leave our house immediately. But when we got home, Amanda was waiting for us with her own surprise. She was sitting at our kitchen table, and she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, someone I didn't recognize. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit, and he stood when we entered. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan," he said smoothly. "My name is Richard Hoskins. I'm an attorney, and I'm here representing Amanda at her request. She's asked me to help facilitate a difficult conversation." George and I looked at each other, then at Amanda. She had her concerned face on, her eyes sad and worried. "Mom, Dad, please sit down," Amanda said gently. "I've been so worried about both of you lately. The memory issues, the confusion, the paranoia. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to hurt your feelings, but I think you need help. More help than I can provide on my own." "What are you talking about?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she was doing. Richard Hoskins pulled out a folder. "Mrs. Brennan, Mr. Brennan, your daughter-in-law has documented several concerning incidents over the past few months. Forgetting appointments, leaving appliances on, getting lost, making accusations against Amanda that don't seem to be based in reality. She's collected statements from several of your friends and neighbors who've noticed these issues as well." "That's all fabricated," George said, his voice hard. "She's been lying to people, manipulating." "I understand this is difficult to hear," Richard continued as if George hadn't spoken. "No one wants to admit they need help. But Amanda cares about you both deeply. She's proposed a solution that would allow you to stay in your home while receiving the support you need. She's willing to accept a caregiving role, but given the level of care required, she'd need to be compensated for her time. She's suggesting a formal arrangement where she'd have power of attorney." "Absolutely not," I said, standing up. "We need you both to leave. Now." Amanda's eyes welled with tears. "Mom, please don't be like this. I'm trying to help you. Ask Daniel. He's worried about you too. He's the one who suggested I talk to a lawyer about the best way to help you both." "Daniel would never suggest that," George said. "Wouldn't he?" Amanda pulled out her phone and played a recording. It was Daniel's voice, having a conversation with Amanda that I recognized from several weeks ago. But she'd edited it, cut out context, made it sound like Daniel was agreeing that George and I needed help, that he was worried about our capability to live independently. It was masterfully done. If I'd heard that recording without knowing the full context, I might have believed it myself. Richard Hoskins stood. "I can see you need time to process this. We're not trying to force anything. But I'd encourage you to think carefully about Amanda's proposal. The alternative would be for her to file a petition with the court expressing concern about your welfare. That would trigger an investigation, competency evaluations, possibly emergency guardianship measures. This way, you'd retain more control over the situation." After they left, George and I sat in stunned silence. She'd beaten us to it, anticipated our move, and launched her own preemptive strike. And she'd done it in a way that made us look exactly like what she'd been claiming we were: confused, paranoid elderly people making false accusations against their caring daughter-in-law. "We still have the notebook," I said finally. "We have evidence of what she's really planning." "But do we?" George asked quietly. "That's her private journal, Claire. We took it without permission, photographed it without her knowledge. Any lawyer worth their salt will argue it's not admissible, that it's just random notes and thoughts, that we've misinterpreted it. And our actions, breaking into her locked box, make us look desperate and unstable." He was right. We'd been outmaneuvered. Amanda had spent months building her case against us, and we'd spent those same months letting it happen, not realizing we were being set up until it was almost too late. I called Daniel immediately, put him on speaker so George could hear too. "Your wife was just here with a lawyer. She played an edited recording of you saying we need help. She's going to file for guardianship." "What?" "Mom, I never said." "The recording has to be taken out of context. We need to fight this. I'll call my lawyer. "Daniel," I interrupted. "She has notes about your life insurance. About your hiking trails. I think she's planning to kill you and make it look like an accident. Then I'm going to the police. Right now. This has gone too far. We're going too, I said. We'll meet you there. We grabbed the printed photographs of Amanda's notebook and headed to the police station. Daniel met us there, looking shaken but determined. We sat with the detective for 2 hours, explaining everything, showing all our evidence. The detective, a woman named Sarah Martinez, listened carefully, took notes, asked good questions. This is concerning, she said when we finished. But I have to be honest with you. This is going to be complicated to investigate. The notebook is problematic from an evidence standpoint, and everything else is circumstantial. However, the notes about Mr. Brennan, about the life insurance and hiking accidents, those are specific enough that we can open an investigation. I'd recommend Mr. Brennan file for a restraining order immediately, and that he takes precautions regarding his safety. What about my parents? Daniel asked. She's in their house right now, planning to take control of their lives. They can ask her to leave, and if she refuses, they can file trespassing charges. They can also file for restraining orders. But I want to be clear. If she's already filed a guardianship petition, that's a civil court matter. The judge will have to evaluate her claims and your evidence. Your best bet is to get ahead of this with your own competency evaluations from medical professionals, and to have good legal representation. We left the police station feeling like we'd accomplished something, but also knowing that the real battle was just beginning. Detective Martinez had said she'd send an officer to escort us home, to ensure we could safely ask Amanda to leave the property. But when we got back to the house with the patrol officer, Amanda was gone. Not just gone from the common areas, completely gone. Her clothes, her suitcases, all her belongings had been cleared out of the guest room. The only thing she'd left behind was a note on the kitchen table. Mom and Dad. It read in her neat handwriting. I'm so sorry things have come to this. I know you're confused and scared, and I know you don't understand that I'm trying to help you. I've gone to stay with friends while we sort this out legally. Please know that I love you both and only want what's best for you. I hope someday you'll understand. Love, Amanda. The police officer read the note and shrugged. Well, she left voluntarily. That's actually better for you. Means you don't have to go through eviction proceedings. After the officer left, we searched the entire house. Amanda hadn't just taken her own belongings, she'd taken other things too. The notebook from the guest room was gone, of course, but so were various documents from George's file cabinet, including originals of some financial records. My address book was missing. And when George went to check his safe, where we kept our will and other important papers, he found it had been opened. Nothing was taken, but the fact that she'd accessed it at all was chilling. She has copies, I said. She's been documenting everything, photographing documents, building her own case against us. That's what she was doing when she got you out of the house the other day, George. She was going through our papers. That night, Daniel stayed with us, all of us too anxious to be alone. We sat up late, trying to figure out our next move. In the morning, we had appointments with doctors for complete cognitive evaluations, per Jennifer Wu's instructions. We had to prove beyond any doubt that we were mentally competent. She's not going to give up, Daniel said as we finally prepared for bed. Even with a restraining order, even with a police investigation, she's too invested in this. She's spent months setting this up. I know, I said. But now we know what she's planning. We're prepared. She can't surprise us anymore. I was wrong about that. Amanda had one more surprise left, and it would turn everything upside down in a way I never could have anticipated. The cognitive evaluations went well. Both George and I underwent extensive testing, memory, reasoning, executive function, everything the doctors could assess to demonstrate mental competency. The results were unequivocal. We were both sharp, mentally sound, showing no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. Jennifer Wu was pleased, saying these evaluations would be crucial if Amanda tried to pursue guardianship. But over the next week, strange things started happening. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence. Our credit card was declined at the grocery store, even though we knew we had plenty of available credit. When George called the credit card company, They told him the account had been frozen due to suspected fraudulent activity. Someone had reported that an elderly couple's card might have been stolen. Then our bank called to verify a large withdrawal request. We hadn't made any such request. The banker explained that someone claiming to be our daughter-in-law had come in with what appeared to be a power of attorney document, trying to access our accounts. The bank had refused because they didn't have the power of attorney on file, but they'd frozen our accounts as a precaution until we could come in and sort it out. She forged a power of attorney, George said, his voice shaking with anger as we drove to the bank. She's escalating. At the bank, we reviewed the document Amanda had presented. It was sophisticated, looked completely legitimate, but the signatures were forgeries. We filed a police report and had the bank add extra security measures to our accounts, including requiring in-person verification for any significant transactions. This is getting dangerous, Jennifer Wu told us when we updated her. She's committing actual crimes now, forgery, attempted fraud. That works in our favor legally, but it also means she's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also become more dangerous. Daniel had moved into a hotel and was varying his routine constantly. The police had opened an investigation into Amanda based on the notebook evidence, but she'd gone to ground. No one knew where she was staying, and she wasn't responding to any attempts at contact. Daniel's divorce attorney was having papers served by publication, since Amanda couldn't be located. Then 2 weeks after Amanda had left our house, I got a call from Patricia. My sister's voice was shaking. Claire, the strangest thing just happened. A woman from Adult Protective Services came to my house. She said they'd received a report that you and George were being financially exploited by Daniel, that he was isolating you from family and trying to get control of your assets. She wanted to know if I'd noticed any concerning signs. My blood went cold. What did you tell her? I told her it was nonsense, that Daniel would never do such a thing. But Claire, she had a thick file with her. She showed me what looked like bank records, emails, all kinds of documentation that supposedly proved Daniel was manipulating you both. It looked official. If I didn't know better, if I wasn't talking to you regularly, I might have believed it. Amanda had pivoted. When her plan to take control of us directly had been blocked, she'd switched strategies. Now she was trying to frame Daniel, to make it look like he was the predator, positioning herself as the concerned whistleblower trying to protect us from our own son. It was brilliant and terrifying. If she could convince the authorities that Daniel was exploiting us, get him removed from our lives, she could step back in as the concerned daughter-in-law, the one person trying to protect us from our manipulative son. And we'd look like confused elderly victims, unable to see that our son was the real threat. Over the next several days, we learned the full extent of what Amanda had set up. She'd filed reports with multiple agencies, Adult Protective Services, the State Attorney General's office, even the medical board, claiming that Daniel had been coaching doctors to give us clean cognitive evaluations. She'd created a paper trail that made Daniel look guilty of elder abuse, complete with forged emails that appeared to be from Daniel, discussing how to access our accounts and liquidate our assets. Daniel's law firm put him on leave pending investigation. Even though he hadn't done anything wrong, the accusations were serious enough that the firm couldn't risk the appearance of impropriety. He was devastated, watching his career crumble because of his wife's systematic revenge. "This is my fault," he said one night as we sat in our living room, going through legal documents with Jennifer Wu. "If I'd never married her, if I'd seen through her earlier, none of this would be happening to you. She would have found another way," I said firmly. "Another family, another target. This isn't about you failing to see through her, Daniel. This is about a predator who's very good at what she does." Jennifer Wu agreed. "I've been researching Amanda's background more thoroughly. With the information from the notebook and some other leads, I found 2 more families she targeted before yours. In both cases, she befriended elderly people, gained their trust, and began the process of taking control of their lives. In one case, she succeeded. An elderly widower signed over power of attorney to her, and she'd drained nearly $200,000 from his accounts before his daughter noticed and filed charges. Amanda disappeared before she could be prosecuted. "That's what the gaps in her history were about," I said. "She's been doing this for years, moving from target to target. Exactly. And she's learned from each attempt, gotten better at it. You were supposed to be her biggest score yet, a couple with a paid-off house worth significant money, with only one child who she could control through marriage. When that didn't work, when you started to catch on, she adapted. That's what makes her so dangerous. She doesn't give up, she just changes strategies. So what do we do? George asked. She's out there somewhere, still coming after us, and now she's made Daniel look like the criminal instead of her. We build our case systematically, Jennifer said. We document every false claim she's made, prove that the documents she's presented are forged, demonstrate the pattern of her behavior. It's going to take time, and it's going to be frustrating, but we will dismantle her credibility piece by piece. For the next month, that's exactly what we did. We hired a forensic accountant to review all our financial records and prove that Daniel had never had inappropriate access to our money. We had multiple medical professionals evaluate us again, independently, to confirm our cognitive health. We tracked down the families Amanda had targeted before and got them to provide statements about what she'd done to them. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. Adult Protective Services closed their investigation of Daniel after our accountant demonstrated there was no evidence of exploitation. The forged emails were proven to be forgeries through digital forensics. Amanda's previous victims came forward with their own stories, establishing a pattern of behavior. But Amanda herself remained elusive. Every time the police thought they'd located her, she'd already moved on. She was living off cash, staying with different people, using different names. Detective Martinez told us that Amanda had created multiple identities over the years, a sophisticated operation that suggested this wasn't just opportunistic crime. It was her life's work. Then, 2 months after Amanda had left our house, everything came to a head in a way none of us expected. Daniel called me early one morning, his voice urgent. "Mom, Amanda contacted me. She wants to meet, says she has information about someone who's been targeting our family, someone dangerous. She says she's been trying to protect us all along, and that she has proof." "It's a trap," I said immediately. "Daniel, she's trying to get you alone." "I know. But she said she'd meet me in a public place, during the day, lots of witnesses around. And Mom, I think I need to do this. I need to hear what she has to say, need to look her in the eye and understand what I married." Against everyone's advice, the police, the lawyers, George and me, Daniel agreed to meet Amanda at a busy coffee shop downtown. But he took precautions. He told Detective Martinez, who had plainclothes officers at nearby tables. He wore a recording device. And he made sure there were multiple exits and plenty of witnesses. I couldn't eat that morning, couldn't focus on anything. George and I waited at home, phones in hand, terrified of what might happen. The meeting was supposed to last an hour at most, and Daniel had promised to call us the moment it was over. 2 hours passed. Then 3. No call from Daniel. When I finally called him, his phone went straight to voicemail. George tried Detective Martinez, who answered immediately. "We lost them," she said, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. Amanda showed up at the coffee shop, but she slipped Daniel something, we think a sedative, in his drink. He started feeling sick, and she helped him outside, supposedly to get air. Our officers tried to follow, but she had someone waiting with a car. By the time we realized what was happening, they were gone. "We have an APB out. We're tracking his phone, but..." "She has my son," I said, and the world seemed to tilt around me. "She has Daniel." The next 12 hours were the longest of my life. Police were searching for Daniel and Amanda, tracking credit cards, following leads, checking properties associated with any of Amanda's known aliases. George and I sat in our living room, unable to do anything but wait and pray. Finally, around 9 that evening, Detective Martinez called again. "We found them. Daniel's safe. He's on his way to the hospital as a precaution, but he's okay." "What happened?" I asked, my voice breaking with relief. "Amanda took him to a cabin about 2 hours from here, someplace she'd rented under a false name. We're still piecing together exactly what she was planning, but it looks like she was going to stage some kind of accident. Maybe make it look like a murder-suicide, with Daniel supposedly killing himself out of guilt over exploiting his elderly parents. She had a suicide note already written, forged in his handwriting. She'd documented it all, planned it meticulously. How did you find them? Amanda made a mistake. She used Daniel's credit card to buy gas on the way to the cabin, probably thinking it would help establish a trail, showing him going somewhere voluntarily. But that ping gave us a direction, and we had helicopters searching the area. We found the cabin and moved in before she could carry out whatever she was planning. At the hospital, George and I held Daniel while he cried. The sedative Amanda had given him had left him groggy and confused, and he was struggling to process what had almost happened to him. She told me everything, he said, his voice hoarse. While we were at the cabin, she thought she'd already won. She told me how she'd planned it all from the beginning, how meeting me was never about love, how she'd researched our family and decided you'd be easy targets. She said she'd already killed before, not just her mother, but others. She said she was good at it, that no one ever suspected because she was patient and careful. She confessed to murder? Detective Martinez asked, recording the conversation. Daniel nodded. She said her mother wasn't her first. There was an elderly uncle, a woman she'd worked for as a caregiver. She made it sound like a career, like she was proud of how good she'd gotten at it. She said I'd ruined the easiest job she'd ever had, that mom and dad were supposed to be simple, but I'd gotten too suspicious too quickly. Amanda was arrested at the cabin and charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, multiple counts of fraud, and more. As the investigation deepened, authorities from other states became involved, connecting her to several suspicious deaths and missing persons cases. The woman we'd known as Amanda Richter had been using different names for over a decade, moving from target to target, leaving a trail of victims. The trial took 8 months to start, and it was a media sensation. The Black Widow caregiver, they called her in the headlines, though that wasn't quite accurate. She wasn't just targeting romantic partners. She was targeting anyone vulnerable she could exploit. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The notebook, Daniel's testimony, statements from previous victims and their families, forensic evidence from her mother's death, digital trails of her various identities. Amanda showed no emotion throughout the trial. She sat there, still beautiful, still composed, looking like she couldn't understand what all the fuss was about. When she finally took the stand in her own defense, she tried to claim that everything had been misunderstood, that she'd been trying to help people, that Daniel and his parents had turned on her unfairly. But the evidence was too strong. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Through it all, I kept thinking about how close we'd come to disaster. If I hadn't overheard that phone call, if I hadn't found the notebook, if we hadn't acted when we did, Amanda would have succeeded. We would have ended up drugged and confused in some nursing facility while she sold our house and drained our accounts. Daniel would be dead. His death ruled a tragic accident or suicide. And Amanda would have moved on to her next target, her next family to destroy. The week after the sentencing, George and I took a trip. Just the two of us, to a beach town we'd always wanted to visit. We needed to reclaim our life, to remember what it felt like to be just us, without fear, without constantly looking over our shoulders. On our last evening there, we walked along the beach at sunset, holding hands like we'd done for over 4 decades. We survived, George said quietly. We did, I agreed. But I keep thinking about the people who didn't. The ones Amanda killed before we met her. The ones who never realized what was happening until it was too late. We can't save everyone, Claire. We can only be grateful we saved ourselves and Daniel. He was right, of course. But it was hard not to think about Helen Richter, Amanda's own mother, dying confused and alone while her daughter slowly poisoned her. Or the elderly widower who'd lost his life savings. Or the others Amanda had mentioned in her confession. The ones authorities were still trying to identify. Evil is real. Not the supernatural kind, not demons or monsters, but human evil. The kind that smiles and brings you coffee and calls you mom, while plotting to destroy your life. That's what I learned from Amanda. And I learned that trusting your instincts matters, even when everyone tells you you're being paranoid. Especially then. 6 months after the trial, life had slowly begun to return to something approaching normal. Daniel had moved back into his apartment, returned to his law firm, and started dating again. Carefully, cautiously, but with hope. George and I had reclaimed our home. Though we'd made changes. New locks, a security system, cameras. Physical things that helped us feel safe, even though we knew the real danger had never been about locked doors. The house felt different now. Lighter, somehow, despite everything that had happened. It took me weeks to be able to walk into the guest room without feeling a chill, without remembering Amanda sitting on that bed, planning her next move. Eventually, we redecorated it completely, turned it into a reading room with new furniture, new curtains, new everything. We needed to erase her presence, make the space ours again. But there were reminders everywhere if you knew where to look. The kitchen drawer that Amanda had reorganized, which I'd stubbornly rearranged back to my system. The garage where she'd gone through George's files. The phone that had rung so many times with calls from concerned friends and family, worried about us because of Amanda's lies. What I didn't expect was how the aftermath would affect our relationships with everyone around us. Some of our friends were wonderful, supportive, understanding, asking how we were doing and actually wanting to hear the answer. But others were awkward, uncomfortable with the darkness that had touched our lives. A few people even seemed to blame us somehow, as if we should have seen through Amanda sooner, as if what happened was partially our fault for being too trusting. People don't want to believe it could happen to them, Patricia said during one of her now frequent visits. So they convince themselves you must have done something wrong, must have missed obvious signs. It makes them feel safer to think they'd handle it better. Maybe she was right. But it still hurt when Betty Morrison, a friend I'd known for 30 years, stopped inviting me to book club. When I finally asked her why, she said she just thought I might want time to deal with everything without the stress of social obligations. What she really meant was that my presence made her uncomfortable, reminded her that terrible things could happen to people like us, in houses like ours, in communities like this one. George struggled with his own demons. He'd always prided himself on being a good judge of character, on his ability to see through people's facades. Amanda had shattered that confidence. He second-guessed himself constantly now, questioned his instincts, withdrew from social situations where he'd have to meet new people. "I let her into our home," he said one night, months after the trial had ended. "I let her get close to our son. I sat with her in my garage and taught her about woodworking while she was planning to kill Daniel. What does that say about me?" "It says you're a kind man who wants to believe the best in people," I told him. "It says you have a generous heart. Those aren't character flaws, George. They're what make you who you are. Amanda exploited those qualities, but that doesn't mean you should lose them." But I understood his struggle because I felt it too. I'd been the one who'd welcomed Amanda into our family, who'd agreed to let her stay with us, who'd made dinner, and tried to be a good mother-in-law, even when my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I'd doubted myself instead of trusting those instincts. And that doubt had nearly cost us everything. Daniel went to therapy, real therapy, not the kind where you just talk about your feelings for 50 minutes and leave. He did EMDR for the trauma of what Amanda had done to him, cognitive behavioral therapy to help him rebuild his sense of trust and judgment. He was open about it, which I admired. He didn't treat it like something to be ashamed of. "She's still affecting my life," he told me during one of our weekly dinners, a tradition we'd established after everything settled down. "I find myself analyzing every interaction with every woman I meet, looking for warning signs, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My therapist says that's normal after what happened, but it doesn't feel normal. It feels exhausting." "Are you dating anyone?" I asked gently. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Sort of. There's a woman at work, Rachel. She's in a different department, so there's no conflict of interest. We've been having coffee, taking things really slow. She knows everything that happened. I was upfront about it because I can't do secrets anymore, can't do anything that feels like manipulation. She was amazing about it. Said she understood, that we could take all the time I needed. She sounds wonderful." "She is. And that terrifies me. Because Amanda seemed wonderful too at first. How do I trust my judgment anymore, Mom? How do I know I'm not making the same mistake?" I didn't have a good answer for him. The truth was there are no guarantees in life. People can be good at hiding who they really are. But I also knew that living in fear of being hurt again meant not living at all. You trust yourself in small ways first, I said finally. You notice how she treats waiters and store clerks. You watch how she reacts when things don't go her way. You introduce her to people who love you and see what they think. And most importantly, you trust that you've learned something from what happened with Amanda. You know what the warning signs look like now. You're not the same person you were when you met her. Daniel brought Rachel to dinner a few weeks later. George and I were nervous. We'd been the ones to like Amanda, to welcome her, to miss all the signs that she was dangerous. What if our judgment was just as flawed with Rachel? What if we led Daniel into another disaster? But Rachel was different from the start. She didn't try too hard, didn't compliment us excessively, didn't insert herself into our family dynamic too quickly. She asked genuine questions and listened to the answers. She talked about her own family, parents still married, 2 sisters she was close with, a grandmother she called every Sunday. She had roots, connections, a history that could be verified and that she spoke about with real affection. And most tellingly, when George accidentally mentioned Amanda, he'd gotten confused about a story and started to say, when Amanda was here, before catching himself. Rachel didn't get weird about it. She just said, "That must have been so difficult for all of you. I can't imagine going through something like that with someone you trusted." And then she let it go, didn't push for details or try to position herself as better than Amanda, or anything manipulative like that. After they left, George and I looked at each other. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think she's either genuinely kind or the best actress we've ever met," George said. "And I'm choosing to believe she's genuinely kind, because the alternative is deciding we can never trust anyone again." Detective Martinez stayed in touch with us periodically. The investigation into Amanda's past had uncovered more victims than anyone had initially suspected. 7 confirmed murders over 12 years, and possibly more that couldn't be definitively proven. She'd been targeting vulnerable people since her mid-20s, refining her methods, getting better at not getting caught. "You should know," Detective Martinez told me during one of her updates, "that we found Amanda's real records. Her actual background. She wasn't from Pennsylvania originally. That was a cover. She was from Arizona, grew up in foster care after her parents died when she was 8. Bounced around different homes, never really belonged anywhere." "You sound like you feel sorry for her," I said, surprised. "I don't feel sorry for what she became," Detective Martinez clarified. "But I can see how she got there. A kid who never had a real family, who learned early that the world was a dangerous place where you had to take what you wanted because no one would give it to you. Who figured out she was charming and smart, and could use those qualities to survive. It doesn't excuse anything she did, but it explains it." I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. About how people become monsters. About the line between understanding someone's path and excusing their actions. Amanda had been dealt a bad hand in life, that was true. But so had millions of other people who didn't become murderers and predators. At some point, she'd made choices, kept making them, and those choices had created the person who'd nearly destroyed my family. Jennifer Wu helped us pursue a civil case against Amanda's estate. What little there was of it. The money Amanda had stolen from previous victims was still in various accounts, and we wanted to ensure it was returned to the family she'd hurt. It wasn't much, and it wouldn't undo the damage, but it felt important to fight for some kind of justice beyond just the criminal conviction. The victim advocacy group we worked with connected us with some of the other families. We met the daughter of the elderly widower Amanda had defrauded, the nephew of one of her murder victims, the adult children of another elderly couple she'd targeted, but abandoned before completing her con. These meetings were hard. Everyone sharing their pain, their anger, their guilt over not protecting their loved ones better. But they were also healing in a strange way. Knowing we weren't alone, that this hadn't been about some failing in us specifically, that Amanda had been a professional predator who would have fooled almost anyone. We formed a support group of sorts, people who understood what it felt like to have evil walk into your life disguised as kindness. One of the hardest things was reading the victim impact statements at Amanda's sentencing, hearing about the lives she'd destroyed. An elderly woman who died confused and afraid, thinking her own mind was failing her when really she was being poisoned. A man who'd spent his last months believing his family had abandoned him, when really Amanda had been intercepting their calls and telling them he didn't want to see them. The families left behind, torn apart by grief and guilt and the knowledge that someone they'd trusted had done this. And through it all, Amanda showed nothing. No remorse, no emotion, no acknowledgement that she'd done anything wrong. Her final statement to the court was a brief claim that she'd been misunderstood, that history would vindicate her. The judge had looked at her with something close to pity and said, "No, Ms. Richter. History will remember you as exactly what you are, a predator who destroyed lives for personal gain." Now, almost a year after Amanda entered our lives and 8 months after she was sentenced, I can finally talk about it without my hands shaking. I can walk through my house without checking corners, can answer the phone without fear, can meet new people without assuming they're hiding something sinister. But I'm different now. We all are. Daniel's more cautious, more guarded. George takes longer to trust. And me, I've learned that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it brings you flowers and calls you mom, and sits at your kitchen table smiling while it plans your destruction. I've also learned that instinct matters. That voice in your head that says something's wrong. Even when you can't articulate why. That voice saved us. I'd felt uncomfortable around Amanda from almost the beginning, but I'd talked myself out of it. Told myself I was being paranoid or judgmental. Never again. Now when something feels off, I pay attention. The other thing I've learned is that there are more good people than bad ones. For every Amanda in the world, there are dozens of genuinely kind people who want to help, who can be trusted, who deserve the benefit of the doubt. Our neighbor Martha brought us meals for weeks after the trial. Patricia came and stayed with us when the nightmares were bad. Daniel's friends from law school rallied around him, supporting him through the divorce and the aftermath. Even strangers, people who'd heard about the case, sent cards and letters of support. That's what I try to remember on the hard days, when the trauma feels fresh again. We're surrounded by more love than evil. It's just that evil is louder, more dramatic, more memorable. Love is quiet and consistent, and easy to take for granted until you need it. I think about Amanda sometimes, sitting in prison for the rest of her life. I wonder if she has regrets, if she ever thinks about the people she hurt, if there's any part of her that feels remorse. Probably not. People like her don't seem to be wired that way. They see the world as a game and other people as pieces to be moved around or removed from the board. Empathy isn't in their vocabulary. But I also think about us, about how we survived, how we fought back, how we rebuilt our lives. George and I just celebrated 42 years of marriage. Daniel's still seeing Rachel, and I'm cautiously optimistic about their future. We have our home, our health, our family intact. Amanda tried to take all of that from us, and she failed. That's the story I want to tell. Not just the scary parts about manipulation and evil, but the parts about resilience and love, and refusing to let someone else's darkness consume your light. Last week, Daniel brought Rachel over for Sunday dinner, and the 4 of us sat around our kitchen table, the same table where Amanda had sat and lied and plotted. And we laughed. Really laughed, the kind of deep, genuine laughter that comes from being safe with people you love. And I realized that this was our victory. This moment, this joy, this reclaimed space. Amanda had tried to destroy our family, our home, our peace. And we'd taken it all back. George made a toast that evening. He raised his glass and said, "To family, to survival, to the strength it takes to trust again after you've been betrayed, and to the wisdom to know that one person's evil doesn't define the world." We all drank to that, and Rachel, who was still learning all the details of what we'd been through, said something that struck me. "You all could have let this make you bitter and closed off. Instead, you're here, together, opening your hearts to new people. That takes incredible courage." She was right. It does take courage to trust again, to love again, to believe that not everyone is hiding something sinister. But the alternative, living in fear, shutting everyone out, letting Amanda win even from prison, that wasn't living at all. That was just surviving, and we'd already done enough of that. So we choose to live. We choose to be careful but not paranoid. We choose to remember what happened but not let it define us. We choose to trust our instincts, protect each other, and keep our hearts open to the possibility of goodness. Because that's the thing about people like Amanda. They want you to believe the world is as dark as they are. They want you to stop trusting, stop loving, stop believing in kindness. And the best revenge, the strongest resistance we can offer, is to prove them wrong. My son's wife was too kind. Until I discovered the real reason she moved in with us. She wanted to take everything. Our money, our home, our lives. She almost succeeded. But we fought back and we won. And now, sitting here in my kitchen with my husband of 42 years and my son and his girlfriend, I can say with certainty, we didn't just survive Amanda. We defeated her by refusing to let her change who we are at our core. That's my story. That's what I want you to take away from this. Evil exists, and it can be charming and beautiful and convincing. But so does goodness. So does resilience. So does love. And in the end, if you're brave enough and vigilant enough and lucky enough, love wins. If you've stayed with me through this whole journey, thank you. Thank you for listening, for caring, for letting me share this difficult chapter of our lives. If this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. And if you've been through something similar, if you've faced manipulation or abuse or someone who tried to destroy you, know that you're not alone. Know that it's possible to come through it and build something beautiful on the other side. Leave a comment telling me where you're from, what this story meant to you. Subscribe so you don't miss other stories. But most of all, take care of yourselves and the people you love. Trust your instincts. Protect your peace. And never let anyone make you doubt your own reality. That's the most important lesson Amanda taught me. Reality matters. Truth matters. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to trust that voice inside you that says something's wrong. Even when everyone else is telling you you're imagining things. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, there are more of us than there are of them. The people who want to help outnumber the people who want to hurt. Hold on to that truth, especially when things get dark. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.